involved also with a clear consciousness. So please feel invited to step onto the plate and take the floor and share whatever you would like to share with us.
Well, thank you for the kind invitation to speak today. Again, I'm Dr. Jason VanHorn. I'm professor of geography at Calvin University. Let's see if I can get this to go forward. Here we go. I'd like to welcome everyone who's here, wherever you are in the world, as Vincent said, whatever time you are in. Thank you for taking a moment to be here today. I'm thrilled to speak to you about the practice of virtue-driven GIScience. A vast majority of us are interested in doing the right thing with GIS, but how do we know what we're doing is right? What is the standard by which we can measure our geospatial rightness? In the last several years, many of us have been in rich conversations about what it means to work in GIS under an ethical norm. But what is an ethical normality? Whose standards are right, and are any of them complete? And the thing I've been contemplating for my own professional life in cartography and at teaching at the university, what does this really mean for the daily work that I do in GIS? So in the last few years, we've had a plethora of powerful conversations about ethics in GIS, from conversations guided by EthicalGEO to American Association of Geographers initiatives to implement locational data ethics in the classroom, even to conferences such as AutoCardo's 2022 Focus Theme Ethics in Mapping, Integrity, Inclusion, and Empathy. GIS practitioners can hardly have missed some touch points on ethics. We've also had publications such as Geoethics by Paploni and De Capua, or Zhao in 2021's The Deep Fake Geography When Geospatial Data Encounter Artificial Intelligence. We've even had blogs and podcasts such as those at Spatial Reserves and Thinking Spatially by Dr. Joseph Kursky, who I believe is on tap to speak later to this group, and focused on ethics, in his work, but also in teaching. So we've had GIS case studies even along a significant number of different trajectories by mostly Dr. David DiBiase at Penn State University, and even work appearing recently in ArcUser magazine and the ArcGIS blog online by Buckley, Carroll, and Brown in the development of the Mapmaker's Mantra, which gives guiding principles in ethical map making. There have been so many ongoing conversations. These efforts have been powerful to reshape the current conversation from previous work within GIS as well. To be sure, the conversation in geoethics isn't new, as Dr. Michael Goodchild reminds us in his 2021 blog post, Geoethics in the Geospatial Community, pointing to the earlier days of 20th century GIS. And like Dr. Goodchild, when I say geoethics, I mean ethics in geography or ethics in GIS, not the focused kind of environmental ethics that could be labeled geoethics, although it can be involving that, certainly stewardship of Earth and taking care of Earth. Major GIS institutions and professional certification societies have published ethical norms for decades, and much of that can be seen in the summary of the outstanding work of the GIS&T body of knowledge. So, summarizing the current state of the art in geoethics, we can say that there is a renewed interest in geoethics for professional life in GIS, which is great. And also, there's a call for teaching geoethics in the classroom before professional life in GIS begins. So, as professionals in GIS, what really does this mean for us? Well, first, if you haven't adopted or agreed on a statement of geoethics, then now is the time to do so. And secondly, when considering what are good sets of geoethical statements, I argue that those embedded with virtue should be prioritized. Indeed, for those GIS educators, I can't stress enough how important it is to have embedded virtues in your training of the next generation of GIS professionals. So let's tackle each of those now. First, if you haven't adopted or agreed on a statement of geoethics for a way that you do professional GIS, then now's the time. And if you've already done so, it's always a good time, I think, to review what you signed on for. So when we think about the standards of what makes a GIS expert, we look no further than the body of, GISNT. This is a wonderful document that continues to get updated often. It's available online, so in a sense, it's a living document. And I use it to construct my undergraduate and graduate GIS curriculum here at the university to hit as many of the skills and knowledge sets I can to maximize for my students their success in professional work. In the GS 12 Ethics for Certified Geospatial Professionals chapter, Dr. Obermeyer at Indiana State and a visiting lecturer at my undergraduate alma mater, Indiana University, has updated the most recent content. She lays out a framework to understand the history of conversation to develop standards for proficiency in ethics and GIS. The American Society for Photogrammetry and Remote Sensing and the GIS Certification Institute are compared in various ways based on their code of ethics in this chapter. And noting the rise of professional societies, organizations, and associations, and citing the U.S. Department of Labor's expectation of 650,000 GIS professionals working by 2020, Dr. Obermeyer writes, while a code of ethics and rules of conduct provide specific directions to professionals on a core set of principles, they cannot provide guidance for each and every challenge that a professional faces. And then she goes on to say, in order to address specific ethical challenges, professionals, including GIS professionals, must also recognize the importance of virtue ethics, including practical ethics, as a complement to professional codes of ethics and rules of conduct. It is here that Dr. Obermeyer and other authors have combined the important step of virtue in ethics as a fundamental aspect in the adoption of a code for GIS professionals. She uses virtue as a stepping stone to the practical life of the GIS professional. I call this approach virtue-driven GIS. Well, Merriam-Webster, the dictionary online, define ethics as the principles of conduct governing an individual or a group, and define virtues as conformity to a standard of right and a particular moral excellence. Now, my philosophy colleague across campus here, Dr. Tempe, and his associate Craig Boyd together wrote the Oxford University Press Very Short Introduction to Virtues, and give a more robust definition to virtue, saying, the consensus across cultures and traditions seems to be that a virtue is an excellent and stable quality of the soul that enables a person to act well regarding some kind of activity. That is, virtues are good habits. They argue that virtues develop over time and that a one-off act is not a virtue, even if it is good. The Boyd and Tempe definition of virtue indicates that not every kind of personal quality can be a virtue, just the ones that are stable and excellent. And that leads us to wonder, what is excellent? The authors say excellence can either be the quality that gives an excellent end, like truth-telling, or makes the person excellent. They point out that three kinds of categories of virtue exist: moral, intellectual, and productive. And those authors go beyond the Merriam-Webster dictionary definition that you have on your screen, which situates virtue as moral excellence. And they include intellectual virtue and productive virtue as well. All can be instructive to GIS professionals. Thus, you can have moral virtue, virtue excellence, intellectual virtue excellence, and productive virtue excellence in the things that you're doing. And the development of those should be a goal of GIS professionals. Well, historical discussions about virtue often include Plato and Aristotle, and when we get to them, we see the four cardinal virtues of practical wisdom, courage, self-control, and justice. Other virtues are typically considered subordinate of these, And for Plato, virtues lead to a flourishing life, to act well, to think well, and to create well. When we think about prudence or practical wisdom, it is the foremost virtue, and it situates our ability to rightly think about what must be done. It is an intellectual virtue, and it requires deliberation, judgment, and choice. Fortitude or courage is a virtue that deals with our emotional ability to overcome fear. Now, fear need not be bad, for sometimes our emotional response to flee from fear-induced situations can literally save our lives. And that's kind of where prudence kicks in. But often fear can paralyze, debilitate, and promote a lack of confidence. Temperance or self-control is the virtue that deals with our physical and emotional desires. It is the ability to confront temptation. And moderation is often the key to excellence in this virtue, as it promotes the healthiest life, and it often is practical wisdom that guides our ability to make such judgments and can lead to flourishing. Last, we have justice, which is the virtue that deals with rendering to others based on merit. It is subject to practical wisdom, kind of the what and how is merit to be rendered, for example, and is fundamentally situated in a reality that all humans have value. The reason for the value can be based in philosophical, theological, or cultural reasons, but at the heart of virtue justice is the idea of how we treat others based on their value. Justice is highly social and often thought of as spatially scalable to individual city, state, and country. Now, given this short list, then, of key virtues, how is it applicable to us in GIS? Well, just as Dr. Obermeyer has pointed out, that virtue ethics can help us make decisions when our standards or our conduct are challenged in the work environment, so too can virtue ethics help us flourish in GIS. They need not just be there to help us face challenges, but also help us have flourishing. And I don't know about you, but I'm always wanting flourishing for myself and for my students. The practice of virtue-driven GIS leads us to so many other virtues and traits as well that we want for ourselves and for our students. Now, the practice of prudence leads to the reflection of our experiences, gaining knowledge of others' experiences, and ultimately leads to excellence and flourishing in things like project management, the choice of GIS projects to take on, the plan of the GIS project you have, the execution of the project itself, and the deliverables of the project. Yes, and more. The practice of fortitude leads to the development of confidence, patience, resolve, perseverance, integrity, and honesty, obvious traits that we want for ourselves in GIS and for our students in GIS to see them flourishing. The practice of temperance leads to the development of humility and time management, hospitality, and even forgiveness in our GIS work. And the practice of justice leads to the considerations of the other, deference to legal and measurement standards, and human rights in our mapping efforts. The practice of virtue-driven GIScience stands to gain us and our next generation of GIS professionals flourishing in their professional lives of GIS. So whatever code of ethics or mantra of mapping you subscribe to, consider the level of virtue that it contains as a way to think not whether the code or practice is good, because it probably is, but instead whether it will lead to flourishing of your work and that of your students. Many of you may have subscribed to the map maker's mantra to be honest and accurate, to be transparent and accountable, minimize harm and seek to provide value, and be humble and courageous in your mapping work. This is from Buckley, Carroll, and Brown in 2022. Or perhaps you've adopted Dr. Joseph Kursky's think method as a way to parse whether you've done a good job in your GIScience. He puts forth the T is the map true, H is the map helpful, I is the map inspiring, N is the map necessary, or K is the map kind. So both of these approaches have rooted elements of virtue to some varying degrees. Where I want to get to is the practice of the virtues that I've discussed in this paper as a way of life in GIS, so that at the end of the day, we are able to see excellence in ourselves and excellence in our work. So after students have completed the introductory course of GIS at my school, I've designed the Advanced GIS course to go much deeper in the area of ethics and virtue. I intentionally insert ethics into our curriculum because it prepares our students to think professionally about their GIS work, but I believe inserting virtue into ethics can also lead to personal and professional flourishing. And therefore, I give a short presentation, such as the one I've given here, and I show them a slide of different virtues. The students then have to, in my course, work in pairs, and they are assigned 2 specific virtues. And then they have to write out in the classroom how the development of their specific virtues can help them professionally and personally in GIS to be excellent and to flourish. And then they have to craft a written paragraph, so I make them write it all out, and then they have to present that to the class, which of course leads to a rich and deep discussion, not just in that class time, but also an ongoing conversation through the semester. I even test them on this material, as some of my former students can attest to in this group right now, in the midterm or the final exam. So here is the list of virtues that I use in my classroom to draw out this kind of stimulating conversation. They could be assigned diligence, patience, honesty, courage, charity, creativity, empathy, humility, stewardship, compassion, justice, faith, hope, and wisdom. Here you can see I've included a variety of virtues that share commonality with different historical, cultural, and even theological traditions. And at the university, that values faith and conversation here at Calvin University. Often my students will connect many of these with their religious tradition. And even though I'm a Christian geographer, not all of my students are, which opens up wonderful conversations in the classroom for students who are at different points in their faith journey. My virtue exercise is not exclusively Christian virtue focused, but for the most part, we end up having conversations here around the virtues of faith, hope, stewardship, compassion, and charity, often from a Christian perspective. For those listening today, I would like to challenge you to think about your own faith tradition and the virtues that are upmost in your life. How can these virtues move you toward excellence personally and professionally in GIS? How can the practice of virtue-driven GIS allow you to flourish? And since I'm speaking to a group of Christians in GIS, do you consider yourself a GIS professional who happens to be a Christian, or a Christian who happens to be a GIS professional? It might be nuanced here, but which comes first and what is the priority in your life in that statement? And to my students, I share that I'm a Christian who happens to be a geographer. To me, there's no real separation in who I am in Christ and the work that I'm called to as a geographer and a GIS professional. Furthermore, in the classroom, I begin showing them the kinds of work that I do as a professional in GIS, specifically the maps that I make, both the static and the interactive. I share with them how virtues can help make decisions about even what kinds of research that I take on and the kind of projects that I do. So let me jump out of my presentation here, and we will go over to this actually. Forgot to go to the slide here. This is what I'm going to show you. This is one of the projects. This is the restorative justice mapping work that I'm currently engaged in. Many years ago, my political science colleague, Dr. Kevin Dundalk, was at a small evening gathering, and he met a person there who had recently been released from prison, a returned citizen who shared the most difficult thing about re-entering into society was actually finding services that would help him succeed in the re-entry process. So Dr. Dindalk approached me and asked if we could build a map together that showed all service providers in the state of Michigan that were friendly and helpful for reentry of returning citizens. I said yes, and we could do that, and we planned it out and looked at the course that would be necessary to achieve the goal and to keep the resource updated and reliable. So let me show you that mapping application real quick here. All right. Oh, I think I've got it here. All right, it's right here. Okay, so in the beginning here, you can see we've got the splash screen, which highlights some of our partnerships. We've partnered with the Michigan Department of Corrections and the Henry Institute here at Calvin University to be able to do this work. You can see in the map here, we've got some instructions to begin with. We're always updating this map. It's situated in somewhat of a horizon technology now, so we'll be updating this mapping application. Here's the state of Michigan, the Upper Peninsula, and the Lower. And here, if I zoom into Kent County, you can begin when I zoom to see these different services that are available throughout this area. So in this map, we have permanent and transitional housing. We have employment, GED programs, food and clothing assistance, legal counseling, case management, mentoring, welfare services, victim offender reconciliation, mental health, hospitality and worship, transportation assistance, recovery of addictions, which is a significant challenge for this population, literacy, financial empowerment, physical health care, and our counties. We can turn any of these layers off. It's a real GIS system, so if we wanted to turn off the counties layer, we could. Here you can see we've got all these different data points, and if we wanted to choose a tool, we got tools down here at the bottom. We've got some virtual services as well, because not all of our services are, now because of COVID primarily available in a physical destination. You can search through this list and find these virtual services. Here you can use the Near Me tool, and you can choose any location on the map, let's say maybe here, and just find out all of the different services that are available within these different kinds of geographic extents where you maybe are, and you could type in your address here. If you know about a service, you can also search here. So if you type, let's say, you didn't know anything except that the name of the organization had Hope in the title. So you could type in Hope and it'll scan all of the services. We have over 4,000 different service providers here, and we update this map every 6 months at a minimum to keep this a reliable, trustworthy document and map. And so you can see here, if you click on these different service providers, they have an address, a contact. You can map it so that you can get there, and so on and so forth. And so this is the kind of mapping application that I've been engaged in with Dr. Dindalk and students every semester and each summer. And when I show this to my students, I try to make a connection to different virtues of my motivations, my cartography and dedication connected with this map. I draw connections to the use of the map even beyond that, because my university, my lights just went out. My university has a 2-year degree associate's program at a local prison. And so this is where prisoners that are enrolled in my school, they actually could graduate. And if some of them get out as returning citizens, then they can use this mapping application as well as graduates of my university. And so we're serving not only the population here in Michigan of those that are returning to society, but even specifically those graduating from my university. And so as a way of concluding my presentation, I'll come back to the beginning. I think for the most part, GIS professionals of all stripes desire to do good with their work. But when they're faced with the challenge and the dilemmas to the work that they do, a revisit to the virtues can be an instructive guide to ask, how can the decisions be made to face and and challenge those situations. But also beyond that, if we dedicate ourselves to building virtues over time and establishing good habits, we will see a flourishing in our work and in our lives. So let me pull up my last contact slide here so we can wrap up, and then hopefully we can open this up for a conversation about the presentation and anything else that you would like to discuss. Thanks so much for your time and your energy to listen to this presentation, and I'll open it up to our audience.
So Jason, thank you so much for this presentation. There's a lot that is there and that I want to just dive into. I was just wondering if you could just mention quickly about the your master's program, which I believe is online, because if you could just talk about that quickly, because that may be something that would appeal to some of the folks who are on this call before we go into questions. And if you do have questions, if you can use the raise hand button, and so that we can answer, so we can navigate the flow.
Sure, I'd be happy to share a little bit about our GIS program. Here I'm going to academics, and no, I'm not going to go to programs. There we go. Let's see, there we go. Sure, we have a master's in GIS here, an online master's program. And as you might guess, I've situated it as a virtue-driven approach to our courses and our thinking within the courses themselves. It's a seven course sequence. We offer a GIS certificate for those who want to end a little early with 3 courses, or a GIS certificate for city and local government, which is 4 courses in the program. And for those who are coming with GIS experience, which almost all of you would be, we have transfer credits as well, so that you can jump right in. And probably for many of you would only have a few courses, maybe 5 to 4 courses that need to be completed. So yeah, it's an ongoing master's program. There's 5 of us that teach in this particular program, 4 full-time faculty and 1 adjunct right now. And it's been a lovely thing to see. We're starting our 3rd year now in the program. You know, the rankings of GIS programs are pretty sparse out there, but recently one of our websites that ranks our GIS programs put us 17th overall, and that's because we now have graduates. And so it's been exciting to see that that ranking, and I've been thrilled to have that. But yeah, it's a great joy of mine to be able to interact with our students and see them flourish and move beyond Calvin in this world. So thank you.
Fantastic. So I am just working here on enabling microphone. I don't know what is quite happening for this. So I want to open up the opportunity for folks who have who may have any questions.
What do I do to stop sharing? How do I do
that? You would.
Let's see if I go to.
Yeah, if you just go up to the
sharing?
top of the screen and stop sharing there.
Okay, there we go.
So I am curious. I think virtues are an incredibly important way for us to frame our Christian life, and I am really curious for, as you've discussed this with your students, what has been some of the pushback that you get from them? So I think about a lot of the mentoring and other activities that I do. So what are some sort of suggested ways for framing this? And so we'll make the assumption of a generalized worldview as opposed to someone who is, totally opposed to sort of a Judeo-Christian perspective. Although you could speak to that as well.
Sure, I've had both. It's Calvin is a place where conversation happens. This is a marker of the university, and really another reason why I've stayed here at the university is because even in the most difficult kinds of things, Calvin is willing to allow us to engage, and our students want that. They want the real, genuine engagement with really hard things. So I've engaged with students about that too. In terms of the virtues, there certainly are critiques to them, philosophically speaking, especially. You know, and not all people believe in a virtues. It is a hard tradition to argue against, and often those that do have critiques of virtue end up in a circular argument. So that is a reality. But for the most part, I haven't had a lot of pushback against virtues per se. But certainly, I've had students that were non-Christian that would say, hey, I think I can find common ground here. Like there are some virtues here that really do associate with my life and I think could promote not only good, but also could help me actually flourish. So I've had some of that. I had students who have come to me and kind of a little bit fearfully said, I just don't think I buy this whole Christian thing. You know, and so I'm not sure exactly how to write or how to address this kind of virtue. And then we get the chance to talk about more general virtue in a sense of, you know, that it can be across different cultures and different even theologies. The short book, actually, the very short introduction of the virtues by Boyd and Tempe, it really is a short version, and it's a fantastic summary of the historical conversation of virtue, Juliana. So I would definitely recommend that to everyone here. The Oxford Press has put a very short introduction. That's a series, and they have everything. It's a remarkable series. They have straight up ethics, which took a big shift and change in the 60s to more virtue ethics, but they have an ethics one and they have this virtues one. They have so many very short introductions too, in terms of the philosophy. And so that is a tremendously easy resource to engage with. It's rich, and I definitely recommend it. In terms of, you know, students pushing back in the mentoring environment, that happens with me as well. And so one of the things I try and do is, with the work that I have them doing, I'm trying to help them ask the question, what's next for them? And getting them to actually think about like what's next, and then how does virtue come alongside them in the what's next is often an effective pathway or tool or procedure that I use with my students when we just are one-on-one in my office here. And so that has been effective for me as I just try and, you know, cast the ball back to them. Hey, what's next for you? What do you see yourself doing? What are you going to do with GIS? And even if students say, I don't know what I'm going to do, professor, I just kind of wait for them. Like I just wait for them and push them to the silence and listen to see what they say. And oftentimes when I have a student that's confused about what's next for them, I just start to ask them, what are they passionate about? What do they see themselves doing? Do they want to change, you know, the world? Are they passionate about that kind of thing? Are they quiet and they want to just pursue excellence? Like, what is it that they're most passionate about? And I try and get them in their GIS work actually to do their GIS project in that vein, because we have project-based approaches in every course we have here.
Thank you so much. Jerry, it looks like you have come on video, so I'm assuming that you have an insightful question as always.
Oh, I don't know. I think if I ask questions, I will monopolize the rest of the time. So I'm not going to ask a question. But I just want to thank you. This was the most enjoyable presentation I had in a long time.
Oh, thanks, Jerry. I appreciate it very much.
I just say that I was a student I actually taught the first GIS class at Andrews University, which is just down the road from you guys.
Yeah.
And I'm now working on a doctorate of missiology with a dissertation that's focused on GIS.
Fantastic.
I've never been GIS certified, but I worked 7 years or so in a local planning organization and did a 9-county map that included your area for biking.
Okay.
And it's been they've refreshed it since I left many years ago. So
Yeah.
anyway, I'm glad to know of you and know of your program, and I'm going to recommend it to a colleague of mine who's a website developer. And so maybe you could just speak momentarily about if someone comes with really strong chops and experience in both church mission, in commercial development of large enterprise databases and online stuff, but now is trying to incorporate GIS into church dashboards. What would your program contribute to them, if anything?
Yeah. Thanks.
I
for
mean,
the question.
this virtue thing has me so excited, and I know my colleague would be excited about that aspect as well.
Well, thanks. Yeah, it has me excited as well, as I've been thinking about this over the last several years. To answer your question, I think students that would come to us with those kinds of backgrounds are, instantly ready to do applied kinds of GIS work. So in terms of developing dashboards or thinking about that, where we're driving them would be the spatial dimensions of the things they're interested in, and really trying to help them visualize, in this case, even sometimes a very difficult or challenging thing to geographically represent. That's one of the things I really enjoy about my own cartography, is mapping very difficult things or taking data sets that are challenging to give a spatial dimension to, and doing that work. So in terms of building those kinds of experiences for our students, in this example, it sounds like the technical challenges, some of the things that deal with computers for this particular student wouldn't be an issue. That has been a challenge, as I've seen students come from maybe a strong humanities background, but maybe not as much in terms of STEM or computer science or something like that. They just haven't had that. Then some technical challenges do exist before we're able to get into the GIS work, where we see the introductory kind of GIS and cartography work. What I do is, with students that are new to this, that make a real career change, what I try and do is just query them through the experience of the introductory GIS course, and at the end, and say, what are you enjoying about this? What is the challenge for you? And where do you see yourself in this? Do you want to move forward? For students that want to move forward, they go into advanced GIS, and this is where, obviously, it all opens up for them. They experience kind of the online mapping, interactive world of ArcGIS Online, and building these mapping applications with story maps and all these other kinds of things, as well as learning about advanced geographical processes or algorithms that are in the toolbox within ArcPro, for example. But then they're able to then focus in on a variety of these questions, whether it's drones and mapping in my remote sensing course, our spatial demographics work, where we're focusing much more on human geography. The most challenging course probably for them is the spatial stats course. So that is a thing where we're trying to build practical experience using statistics for both descriptive and inferential approaches that you actually might encounter in the workplace. And then probably my favorite course is the business location intelligence course, where I'm teaching students a lot of business analyst and network analyst stuff. And then probably the last course that most of our students take is the Python course and spatial database management. For your friend, probably that would be an easy onboard based on web experience and dealing with probably JavaScript and object-oriented approaches to solving problems.
Sorry, can I have a follow-up question? If not, I'll back off to someone else.
Oh, why don't we go to Vincent, and because he has his hand raised, but then Jerry would love to have your follow-up question as well.
All right.
So let's give Jerry some time to phrase his question properly, so Jason can answer it very easily. I was also intrigued by what you said in your presentation. You said the virtues help you to decide what to do, and that sparked something within me. So I was really interested in, maybe you could elaborate a bit on that.
Sure, I'm happy to. When I think about the vast skills that are in this webinar right here alone, it is tremendous. We have real world changers here in the ability of what we can do with GIS. There literally are unlimited trajectories that we all could accomplish individually and together. Maybe we don't have the time or the strength to do them, but we can take them in many directions. And Vincent, I have so many people knocking on my door at the university. As I have been hired to champion GIS at Calvin University, I came in 2007 out of my PhD work, and I've had so many people wanting to have me join grants or having me join different initiatives. And what I've had to do is learn how to say no. That's been a real challenge for me. But then how to choose the best of really good options, right? How do I go about the process of saying yes to really the best? And so as I've thought about that, prayed about that, sought that, when I look at these virtues that I've presented to you, you know, this list actually that I show my students: diligence, patience, honesty, courage, charity, creativity, empathy, humility, stewardship, compassion, justice, faith, hope, wisdom. When I look at that list, I parse some of the things that I choose against that list, right? Not only do I want these things for me, but also do I see these things being developed for myself, for those that are involved in the project, or even the end goal, right? Maybe it's public participatory GIS work or something like that. Like, how can these virtues connect with that very thing? I love projects. I love doing GIS projects that are short and long. I like all of these kinds of things. I want to say yes to all of them usually, but I can't. And so this is how, in many ways, I go about it. I'll sit down and I'll say, okay, how does this connect to charity? How does this connect to stewardship of earth or of peoples or of society? How do I connect, you know, this idea of justice and compassion with this project? Is that there? And I'm not able to connect all of these virtues to any project. Like, it's very difficult. I don't think I've ever had a project that I've taken on that's covered every single one of these virtues. That would be pretty amazing. But I do look for ones that have a element that goes deep with one or two of these, or that connects to several of them. And basically I'll say, okay, this is worth my investment. This is worth my time. This is going to benefit my students for sure. That's actually a very big one for me, is whether or not it benefits my students. Most of these projects in terms of grants are very low funded. They're not making a huge difference financially as a professor for me. You know, they're not huge contracts or anything like that. So it ends up being those kinds of evaluations that I make when I think about the connection of what do I take on with the virtues that I'm seeking to grow into and develop over time as good habits. Does that help?
Yeah, I think that's super great. And one thing that I just like a helpful framework for me is like my husband and I, we have 4 cornerstones in our marriage. I have 4 diamonds on my engagement ring that represent that. But I've been thinking a lot more about what does it look like if we actually shifted those into like virtues? Because I read, for those who don't know, I have a 1-year-old that sort of like has sort of consumed my life, thinking about like what does it mean to be like a Christian parent? But this idea of like transitioning those cornerstones into like virtues and having like family virtues. But for me, having like this list of things that for my husband and I, like that we use as our barometer for like if we say yes to something, right? Has been, which are things that for us are rooted in scripture, has been so incredibly helpful, because when you say yes to something, you're oftentimes saying no to something as well. So I really like that framework of how are the how, you know, coming up with those virtues, and how is that being lived out in these projects?
Yeah, thanks.
So, Juliana, may I frame another question? All right. So I'm interested in connecting market segmentation data with community engagement for spiritual blessing.
Okay.
And there was a company that was marketing for churches segmentation data. It was called
Yeah, I've seen this
Percept.
before. Yeah, I've seen this before.
And they went out of business. And I think there is a place for a nonprofit organization to be like Barna and poll people, you know, do research that would help us understand how so readily available market analysis correlates to things that could be impactful from the point of view of church and community.
Sure. When I think about the connection of tapestry segmentation data that Esri produces, these 67 different categories that they've come up with that try and describe the population of socioeconomic, cultural kinds of realities for different geographies, whether they be zip codes, block groups, blocks, census tracts, counties, whatever they are, different spatial scales. The key challenge in business location intelligence that I teach is just how do I make the connection to that tapestry data with something that is meaningful and answers real questions. So it's not a surprise that a company would have the ability to produce wonderful reports of tapestry segmentation, but then have churches not know how to connect their actual reality and mission to that tapestry world. So that's not a too big of a surprise. So when I'm dealing with that in the classroom, I'm having students actually ask real meaningful questions. I kind of force them to do this with the tapestry segmentation data. We ask questions that deal with Christian life or mission or focus. And in many cases, the tapestry segmentation data is wonderful to answer some aspects of things, but not everything. So let's see, how can I say this? The tapestry segmentation data that I show my students how to use, how to work with, can often lead to other kinds of analyses. Perhaps they're interested in something, Jerry, like how do churches serve populations? Okay, maybe they're answering that kind of a question. And in this case, they could say, well, let's do a gap analysis to see which churches in an area are actually providing an after-school program for kids and which ones are not, right? And so here we maybe are able to use the business analyst data and the tapestry segmentation data in conjunction to get to some knowledge about that. but maybe we can't. Maybe we just need a survey of all congregations in an area to see what they're doing to make that analysis. Once we're able to find those gaps, that's when we can bring in that segmentation data and really use it to answer something about what are the populations there? Are they in need of this kind of after-school program? You know, we can utilize the data that way after we've actually provided an analysis. So you can see here, if we just provide the data, I'm not surprised that it would be ineffective to make a shift or a change for congregations, because why should they be expected to know what to do with that data? They don't. But if you have an analysis conducted and then you use it to help answer other questions and find solutions, that can be a real powerful thing. Does that make sense?
Well, fantastic. We have just a few more minutes here. And Jason, I think you have really sparked the curiosity of so many folks. Stephen said, I'm impressed with your confident description as a Christian with a calling as a GIS professional. This framing is seldom visible in presentations at large GIS conferences, as if it is a quality that has to be hidden, leaving audiences with the prevailing humanist storyline that it's all about what the humans can do to solve global issues. Any thoughts on the observed hiding of the identity of Christ within the professional community?
Yeah, I appreciate that comment. I think my observations are similar. And, in terms of thinking about that balance of my Christian life and focus as a professor of GIS, as a Christian who happens to be a geographer, for me, it's difficult to retreat actually from who I am, because so much of who I am is out in the public life now. My public presence is there. You can know if I'm a Christian or not. It's pretty evident and easy to know that from my bios or from my work, the place of work that I am employed at Calvin University. It's usually not too much of a surprise. So in a sense, I'm aware of my life as a Christian when I'm at a conference or when I'm talking with colleagues. And in a sense, my hope is that my disposition would be winsome, whether or not they know I'm a Christian or not, and that my thoughts would be directed towards love and kindness, that my work would be positioned in that way. So I think probably in some places I would be a little more careful maybe about my Christian witness per se with my vocabulary maybe. But at the end of the day, um, I think probably most folks are going to know I'm a Christian. Whether they see that acted out in my life or not is a question. I'm imperfect. I fail all the time, and I know that people are watching, and so yeah, yeah, and I have my bad days too. Certainly, it's a reality for all of us. So I would say, I guess in many ways I do pray this a lot. Lord, would you give me strength, and would you give me favor in the eyes and hearts of those that I'm around, and just give me an opportunity to speak into their life, to bring encouragement and love to them, and then I leave it just there. I leave it with the results being of the Lord, and hope for positive conversations, which don't always happen, and can be antagonistic sometimes. So.
Thank you so much. And we're sort of ending here. The last question that we have for you is, someone said that there was a resource that you recommended, that there was the Oxford Press part. Yeah, I started to look up the book as well and only found like tofu. So
Okay. let me share my screen. I'll pull it up. Let's see here.
That would be great. Thank you.
There we go. Okay, here we go. So the very short introduction, the virtues, Boyd and Tempe. This is it right here, the very short introduction by Craig Boyd and my colleague in philosophy here, Kevin Tempe. Kevin and his wife are both philosophers with expertise in the virtues. And this is the resource that I mentioned that some of you may be interested to read.
Thank you so much. We really appreciate you sharing this information. And for folks who are part of Christians in GIS group, our next webinar will be on October 24th at the same time. This video recording will be put up on our YouTube channel. And we just thank you all for coming and participating. Thank you so much.
Thanks, everyone. Thank you for having me.